Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 17 free hit draft. A lot of people have been requesting for it, most likely because the free hit is one of the last chips to be used in conjunction with potentially a triple captain. I think a lot of people have wildcarded, but I know people are looking for a wildcard video. So if you are interested in a wildcard video, please do drop a comment within the YouTube video just so I can actually have an understanding of what videos I should prioritize this week. I am trying my best to make sure we get the what we've learned out. I do want to get that before the fixture schedule gets busy again, but it's just been so much backlog and so many fixtures as well with the midweek last week. But without further ado, let's jump into the free hit. If you've not actually looked at, let's say, a free hit and you want maybe a competing free hit draft to have a look at as well, just for inspiration, Fantasy Football Hub actually have their AI team rating tool. You can actually look for a 100% rated AI draft per the points projection model at Fantasy Football Hub just to see what a competing draft would look like. And on top of that, you can actually run your free hit chip strategy as part of the My Team pick and rating tool, which will kind of help you plan the strategy that you have in and out of Game Week 17, because taking Game Week 17 out will just mean you don't have to focus on fixtures here. You can prioritize on assets that just simply don't have a good fixture on 17, or just you might not even want to have if you ignore 17 from the landscape. Jumping into 17, I think it's a perfect segue just to look at the fixtures and why you'd want to do a Game Week 17 free hit. At 11fi.com, we have our favorite team strength model from the perspective of looking at how to evaluate attacking a game week. So from this perspective, I think the attack, Man City and Bournemouth make the most sense. I'll just talk about assets for a moment. I think with City, because the attacking XG or expected goals is so high, I do think that the punt of the free hit really should be to have a slightly different draft of the people. What is the way that you can do this? This is really triple City attack to me. Yes, it might sound overkill, and people think the idea is if you own 3 attackers, you might not get the upside because only 2 players are going to get the hulls, but you're never going to know who's going to get the hulls necessarily. Sure, of course, Foden and Haaland have been the players, but recently Cherki has gotten himself extremely involved. Doku is out. Marmoush is at AFCON. It's very hard to see how Cherki's minutes will be poor, especially since I think he's now established himself to being a first-team player for this team. So I do really like Cherki as a pick, and I think that is how you attack something like the extremely high expected goals here. Because if I switch gears and look at the clean sheet odds, it's so close between City, Arsenal, and some other teams, like, for example, a Bournemouth, a Brighton, and a Brentford. So this, to me, just says that you might not get that much more upside going for a City defender unless they're extremely attacking, right? And Nico O'Reilly, to be fair, is a good example of someone like this. But because Cherki does exist and he is still ultimately a more attacking player than Nico O'Reilly, I do think there's an opportunity here to just simply go towards triple City attack. As far as just looking at how you target and build from the back, as I said, with the clean sheet odds, to me, Bournemouth makes the most sense because you actually have players in that team that actually get you defensive contributions. Arsenal, Hincapié is actually able to do that, but I think Calafiori is a pretty interesting punt for this game week. As far as, let's say, Brighton, yeah, we have Van Heck, but that's about it. I think he's not exactly my favorite pick. I would even maybe stretch towards going for potentially, let's say, a Brentford pick. Just because with someone like Collins, you have really, really good expectations for defensive contributions, and to an extent, Anderson as well. But I have to be honest, after watching Fulham versus Burnley, I'm just not that intrigued in the Fulham defense. Knowing that Bassi is going to be out as well, that they'll lose Chukwueze. Part of it is when you kind of look at models, you're trying to also understand what are the small little shifts that would make you go one decision or the other. Yes, Fulham are at home, but as I said, I have been pretty dismayed in them as a team. And I do think Collins is a pretty good pick just because he's actually one of the best def corners. So if you take away, let's say, Bournemouth, Collins is probably the best def corner from this list outside of Anderson. And from a Game Week 17 perspective, he's going to be someone who's close towards the free hit draft. And I'll talk about Collins in a moment. In terms of goals, shifting gears back to that, I don't think there's too much to say. I think this is a great Brighton game, a great Bournemouth game, a decent Liverpool game, but not exceptional. So Ekitike is interesting simply because he's been wonderful and he's been such a fantastic player. And even Szoboszlai might not even be in this game. So yeah, I think the pro there is just really looking at Ekitike. I don't really see Liverpool as a team that you want to invest into from the perspective of, let's say, the free hit from a defensive point of view. And a lot of people will own Crystal Palace, but you have the opportunity here to get, I guess, better clean sheet odds anyways and have slightly better picks, even if marginally. And that's kind of the point of the free hit. You don't really want to be rebuilding everyone else's team. You do want to take those marginal gains and hope that they land your way. So using that as an underpinning for the team construction, I do think, as I said, triple City attack is the way that I would go for it because it gives you a genuine differential. Everyone is going to triple up on City this week. This is the way that you differentiate yourself while still actually probably getting higher points expectations compared to everyone else's team. As far as it pertains to defense, I really think that Arsenal is still the team that I would invest into. Yes, Chelsea have eclipsed them for clean sheets. Yes, they haven't kept a lot of clean sheets as of late, but this Everton team is extremely, extremely weak. Dewsbury Hall being out, Ganaguaya being out, and Jai being out for AFCON, these two players are critical towards Everton. And recently, we've also seen that Dewsbury Hall has been someone who has operated within, for example, the midfield position and the 10 position and is essential to that team. So I think him being out with a hamstring injury just means that Arsenal's probably the team that I'd like to back again. Now, a lot of other managers do own double Arsenal defense, and I think the pro of the free hit here is getting triple Bournemouth in, getting more Brighton in if you don't have them already. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't even have free hit in the first place, right? Because if you're just going and rolling with a perpetual team, you're going to triple up on City this week. You might go for one Bournemouth attacker, and you are likely to be already tripled up on Arsenal. But if you're not, this is a good opportunity to say, this is maybe one last good Arsenal game. The fixtures do get worse for Arsenal. I would like to have double Arsenal defense for this week. And actually, my team with only one Arsenal defense is something that I'm comfortable with having, or even zero Arsenal defense, because after Game Week 17, I just think, yes, of course, they're the best defense, but it's not like they're serious DEFCONers. So a lot of the counterbalancing against Arsenal's clean sheet odds would just be the price point and also the fact that other teams just get better defensive contributions per 90, which will sort of offset the expected points projections of Arsenal and stop you, I guess, from requiring to keep Arsenal defense going forwards. So I would actually go here with Raya and Hincapié. The reason why I'm doing this is because the draft that I've created, even I am struggling to afford, and I have massive team value. And I recognize that other people don't have the same team value, so we'll talk about alternative picks very, very quickly. But if Senesi is available, I would go with Senesi and Truffet. Now, Truffet is probably, someone can ask, why Truffet? But Truffet actually has been an exceptional defender in terms of defensive contributions per 90. So interestingly, he's actually better than some of the center backs that pair alongside Senesi. So it's not always about getting center backs. Sometimes there are niches within teams where you can see Truffet is actually a bit of a double-edged sword. He actually has really good bonus point metrics because I think he is someone who actually creates chances in open play. If you watch him play, he just loves, for example, a cutback or just generally a cross when he is, let's say, operating alongside Semenyo on the left. And I do really like him because the DEFCON numbers are high. And of course, Bournemouth's clean sheet numbers are high too. The one thing to think about with Bournemouth is what's the best triple up? I think Evan Nilsson maybe deserves a shout here, but he really has been shocking this season. I don't think he's found any form, but that doesn't really matter when you're playing versus Burnley. Simply put, even like a team like, I guess, Fulham were able to create so many chances so easily versus Burnley. And yes, of course, Raul didn't get to score, which is probably, counter towards the point that I'm making. But it's just the idea that for a team that isn't particularly good on offense, like Fulham, they still were able to create some of the best opportunities that they've had this season, even with regards to, let's say, how silly that first set piece goal was. So from that perspective, I do really like just going for the double Bournemouth defense because I just don't think Evan Nilsson's quite close. There is an aspect, and I'll talk about in a moment, if you want to go a little bit differential, or simply put, if Senesi is not available. If Senesi is not available, I would probably just go for Nathan Collins. I kind of gave the reasoning before, but I think his DEFCON rate probably supersedes me wanting to own Fulham just because if I'm free hitting, I probably don't want to have a Fulham defender. Just watching Nottingham Forest's recent performance, Fulham's terrible defensive performance versus Burnley, and then all the reasons that I mentioned with some of the AFCON players impacting them, I kind of like the idea of just simply going for Collins. Brentford looked pretty solid versus Leeds. Yes, of course, they conceded still, but this is still a good game on paper, and we know that Wolves have been just such a flat team that haven't really been inspiring. Yet they scored one goal versus Arsenal, and that's impressive, but it really was just that one sort of chance in a game where they really did nothing, and that was Arsenal's worst performance in the season so far. So I don't think much has really changed in terms of the narrative of Wolves. If I had to give a little bit of credit to Burnley, even though I think they're the worst defensive team by far, they are probably still a better attack than Wolves. So I think Collins coming in to deputize is actually quite nice. In defense, I would go with Ryan Hincapié, but the cheaper option, especially since if you're going to back Collins anyways, and maybe you keep Senesi in this draft, I think is just simply going for Collins and Kelleher. This saves you a lot more money. This probably saves you around 1.5 million, if not more. And the main pro towards it, I would say, is just being able to actually afford some of the options that you have in the attacking positions. This week, I do think we need a little bit of budget on attack. If you are to, let's say, maximize on this game week, because unfortunately we have stumbled, I guess, into a template within the midfield position where a lot of the more expensive mids are the ones that probably have the highest points projections. Counter, I guess, to how a lot of how the season has gone, right? For example, players like Rice and Jai, other cheaper players like even Dewsbury Hall have been doing really well as of late, but with more of them sort of falling by the wayside, or Saka's also, I guess, hitting form, Palmer coming back. Generally speaking, I think we are moving towards a structure where most of, and this is logical, right? This is how the pricing was supposed to work. But most of the good midfielders are just going to be the more expensive ones, especially on a game week like this. So I do think that Bruno and Saka have to be here. I don't think this is sort of like a concession that I would probably make unless you are super confident, for example, in someone like Harry Wilson with a much worse fixture. Simply put, Burnley is not comparable to Nottingham Forest in terms of defensive quality. Despite the home and away gap, I just think, yeah, Burnley are that shocking, and you really should be expecting to target Burnley as much as possible, which is a bit of a shame here with Bournemouth if you don't go Evan Nilsson, but we'll talk about that in a moment. In the midfield, I would go with Semenyo for sure. There's no doubts to how good he is as a pick. I'm recording this video before Bournemouth would have played versus Man United, so I don't really know too much about Senesi's availability for the United match, but I would take the assumption that Semenyo is perfectly fine for this match. And he is obviously the easiest Bournemouth pick to pick. And actually, when you kind of look at, let's say, the schedule in around 17, the beauty of the free hit, I think specifically, is Brighton actually have poor fixtures in and around 17. So do Bournemouth. So if you're not invested in these teams, this is a good free hit to go for. So I would go Semenyo here. I would then also just top off with Cherki and Foden. I don't think there's really any way you can skirt around this. AFCON just removes City players. Doku's injury removes himself. And as I said, I think Cherki is a good punt against what the template is, which is basically two City attackers in Foden and Haaland, and actually a Nico O'Reilly. Some people might have a slightly worse triple up of City where they have Reinders, Foden, and Haaland, but you're winning anyways, I think, if you go for Ryan Cherki as a pick. In terms of, let's say, whether you go for 3-4-3 or 3-5-2, I personally prefer the 3-5-2 because this way I can actually squeeze in players like Bruno and Saka within my team and also keep Cherki in. But if you want to go 3-4-3, I think Ekitike begs some consideration. And I think the replacement for Ekitike within this draft structure is going to be Bukayo Saka. If you want to go for someone like Ekitike and want to go 3-4-3, I do think that's how you do it. Haaland, Thiago, and Ekitike. Now, as I said, the front line is also pretty template, and this is something that I think you can probably ignore, right? If you are a little bit more risk seeking as a manager, this is an opportunity to go against Thiago as a pick. So why would I suggest this? I think if you want to go Evan Nilsson, and maybe you don't really want to back the Bournemouth defense for whatever reason, I do think there's an opportunity here to maybe just go Evan Nilsson. I'd still probably go for Senesi personally, or Truffet, but if Senesi's out, yeah, Evan Nilsson, I think, is actually really worthy of consideration here. Evan Nilsson's minutes, for the most part, have been good. You're not really impacted by midweek minutes impacting Evan Nilsson's minutes, which, for example, when you look at the last time we had midweek fixtures, he can get benched, he can get rotated. In this situation, I don't think he does. Do I think Thiago is still one of the best picks for this week? Absolutely. But he is almost 80 to 90% owned, and I can see this as an opportunity for other people to say if Evan Nilsson is a similar pick, maybe close to like for this game week, why not just go for Evan Nilsson instead when he just has the best fixture in town from an attacking point of view? So I feel like that is one way you can approach this. And going back to the point, maybe you can still go double Arsenal, Collins, Truffet, if Senesi's out, as I said, and go Evan Nilsson. This is a good way to sort of ignore Thiago altogether, and probably one way I would do this. Because we're spending so much money within the front 11, the way that this team would work is we just go for Bruggen, Vandenberg, Calvert-Lewin, and Goodmanson as our bench. For me, this is the cheapest bench possible, where even within the defense and attacking positions, you actually have a good auto sub no matter what. Goodmanson is also just one of the cheaper players. Between teams like Leeds, Sunderland, Wolves, Burnley, I think Leeds actually probably have the best fixture this weekend anyways, based on clean sheet odds and a mixture of goal share. So I would just take Goodmanson as the auto sub here. This is the expensive team. This is the team that assumes that Senesi's fine, and this is probably the team that I would go with myself. Hincapié I have because I don't think Gabriel's coming back. He's really good at DEFCON, and I honestly can't afford Calafiori. But if you, let's say, don't want to go Hincapié, you find him boring, I do think Calafiori is probably the player that I think you can reasonably reach from a budget perspective that can actually live up to, let's say, the classical attacking fullback return haul whilst also keeping a clean sheet. Calafiori's one of the more interesting players in my mind. Timber obviously has great underlying stats, but he is that much more expensive, and I don't think you can really afford to keep this draft in place if you go Timber. Now, you could obviously, as I said, go Saka to Ekitike, and that completely changes the context of these things because you can simply go stack in the midfield over Calvert-Lewin. But I would personally go Saka at this moment just because Everton are that fragile as a team. And they're both away fixtures. Tottenham, of course, got completely collapsed on by Nottingham Forest, and that's not a pretty sight, but at least they're at home within this match, and hopefully you'd expect that they could maybe mitigate the damage versus Liverpool. Whereas I think with Everton, it's going to be a bit of a struggle with Arsenal actually getting a full week worth of rest. And honestly, a lot of the other teams within the league having to play midweek fixtures, impacting them, and their ability to rest and rotate. So for the cheap draft, as I mentioned, if you don't go for the double Arsenal defense, I think one way to simply go about this is just to go for the double Brentford defense. So you go for Kelleher here, and you go for Collins. And I'd probably keep the attacking structure in place. Once again, if Senesi's out, maybe you can still actually just go for one Arsenal defender, I guess, and shift on over from someone like Thiago into an Evan Nilsson to take a little bit more of a risk-seeking approach. The only thing that I don't like about that is going one Arsenal defense kind of defeats the purpose of, I suppose, the beneficial aspect of doubling up on a team. Most people have around, let's say, I think on average, 100 to 120% Arsenal defense. So just by going for one Arsenal defender, you're not really standing to gain much here. But that's pretty much it. I do think that this is the best free hit possible. I think, as I said, you want to be targeting teams like Bournemouth, Brentford, and Brighton. So unfortunately, whilst Brighton are not featured within this draft, and I do actually really like Brighton, I just think I'd rather target, at the end of the day, Burnley first, West Ham at home from a City perspective, and still lock in players like Bruno and Saka over, let's say, a Minte at this moment in time. Some of your auto subs could come from Brighton. For example, in the cheaper draft, you could probably afford something like Welbeck, as an auto sub option. But that's about it in terms of sort of my faith with Brighton. I think they had a really good performance versus Liverpool, but in a way they also are a team that constantly dismays us when I think they have really easy fixtures on paper. And don't take advantage of those opportunities. So that's going to be my free hit draft. I hope this serves you well. Once again, if you guys enjoy the content or you want to see more content, do let me know if you want to see a wildcard draft. If that's something that a lot of people are still sort of keeping as a chip, which I would be quite surprised to, just looking at the kind of chip statistics around the world. But would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you guys soon.